And so how are you taking things personally dealing with everything?
Um, it's been a lot. I definitely think it's, kind of a roller coaster. There are days when, it's easy for me to stay positive and just kind of focus on my kids and, take advantage of the time that I
Hmm.
have at home. But at the same time, you have moments when you think about, the scope of this pandemic and you think about the suffering and all of the essential workers that still have to go to work every day.
Yep.
And, my mood definitely fluctuates based on that. It's hard to stay motivated sometimes, and it's hard to work from home. I have three kids and trying to, balance schoolwork and, parenting when you're doing it in the same building is not easy. So, it's been complicated to say the least. But, we're just trying to lean in and enjoy this time together and stay as, smart as we can to, put ourselves in a good position, financially and emotionally after this.
Yeah. One of the things that I've discussed during this series with Dr. Tidwell on episode 27 is part of that $2 trillion stimulus bill should have been counseling and therapy for everyone, especially for those who work in the school environment, and of course our kids and parents who depend on the services that we provide in education. Like that needs to be a part of it, like free therapy for everyone. That's what I say we need.
Therapy should definitely be more accessible.
Definitely, definitely, we need it. We live in a
Um,
I don't know what we call this age, what generation this is. Is Generation Z? Is that the youngest right now? Um, Yeah,
I think
Generation Z. And so they're overwhelmed with technology. But I look at it as like a second wave of like the information age. Because with that technology, we've got social media, we've got our phones, we've got our laptops, we've got our tablets, we have television, it's so many different ways to access information that I feel like it's an overload. And kids don't know how to regulate their behavior. So they can't really regulate all of the information that they're receiving from the technology. And I'm no scientist, but it's definitely some type of influence on them, and we're seeing it because a lot of kids are easily distracted,
yes.
especially our black and brown boys, and that's concerning because then we see a over diagnosis of them having learning disabilities and being sometimes incorrectly placed in special education services when it's not necessarily that they need to be placed in special education services to get the accommodations or the instruction that they deserve.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. It's funny that you say that too, because I recently had a conversation with my colleagues because we were just kind of talking about the hoops and everything that general educators have to jump through in order to get their students that they're thinking would
Hmm.
qualify for special ed, like just getting them services and just like the bureaucracy, the
It's a
paper
lot.
meetings. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
But I was explaining to my staff like the reason why these hurdles are there, the reason why you have to jump through hoops is because we as teachers, all of us have our biases, and we tend to, you know, impose those biases
Yep.
onto our students.
Right.
And anything that does not fall within what we would label as typical in terms of behavior or attention or academic performance, then we want to automatically say, well, then they must be in
Hmm.
special ed, must have a learning disability or they must have a disability of some sort.
Hmm.
And that may not necessarily be the case. Sometimes we just have to tweak what we do in the gen ed classroom to help it be more accessible to them. And I definitely think too that like being a special education teacher or having a special education credential, because my
Hmm.
master's in special ed and then I hold both a special education and a gen ed credential,
Hmm.
having both knowledge banks, I think help be a better classroom teacher because I'm able to take that knowledge that I kind of learned in my special ed program about accommodations and about, universal design for learning, and I can implement those in the classroom and, help some students along the way without automatically having to be referred to special ed because of that reason, for that same reason of our students of color being over referred.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll say all students at this point, because like you said, we can't control what goes on at home. And for many of our students, unfortunately, across the country, they don't have the most organized or structured environment. You've got literally some kids who are sitting around watching TV every day, like nonstop, or they're on their video game, or they're on YouTube, or some other type of video platform, and they're not necessarily watching content that is doing anything with their brain. They're not exercising those brain muscles or brain waves, as you will. And so you brought up an interesting point with behavioral regression. That's a really, really good piece of insight coming from the special education perspective. And I was going to ask you about summer lag, which, more so focused on the academic side. I never thought about summer lag on the behavior side, because we've got kids missing 2 months of instruction, and then they already missed the summer, which is why it's called summer lag. And then now we're going to go into, and so here's the other thing. So let me add to that question. What if this thing carries out past when we normally start back? And LA, I don't know around what date do you guys normally start back?
So LAUSD and charter schools affiliated generally start mid-August, like beginning to mid-August.
Okay.
Is when we usually start, yeah.
Yeah, and we normally start like around August 1st. If not August 1st, depending on what day August 1st falls on, pretty much August 1st. And so let's say hypothetically that we are still in quarantine in fall, because now we have a lot of colleges and universities who've proactively said, hey, you're welcome to enroll in this school. Come on, freshmen, but there will be no physical classes. You will not see your professor face to face. Everything is going to be through distance learning. And of course, colleges and universities, they've been doing distance learning for forever. So it, for them, isn't as big of a jump with everything going on as it has been for K through 12. But what does that look like for your school? What does that look like for all of your students, even in your city in LA? Just thinking about all of the different type of schools that you guys have there. Like, what happens if we can't come back until, I don't know, November?
Right. So, I've actually been giving this a lot of thought, because I'm actually switching organizations. So
Ooh.
I know, crazy time to be getting job, right?
We got to talk about that. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Ooh.
So, there's a good chance that school will not return to what we, envision school to have been for a long time. Even if we're not still sheltering in place, which I don't necessarily think we'll still be sheltering in place. I think things will start opening up, but I don't see us all just going back to school the way it was just right off the bat. I think that there's going to have to be some preventative measures that we're taking in. Yep. There might be even some more extreme things, like I know some organizations are talking about like shifts. So having, a half day, or, switching days where half of your class is coming half of the week and the other half is coming half of the week. How to do lunches and shifts so that, kids aren't sitting too close in proximity in the lunch area. Mm-hmm. I think mask wearing is going to be common. I think people are still going to be wearing masks. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I think that, there'll probably be a multitude of effects that we'll see. I don't see us going back to school to business as usual come August at all. I definitely think that instruction is going to have to be, adjusted some way, whether it's incorporating distance learning with classroom teaching, or if it's, just how are we going to do this while also social distancing, or if it's just like, it's too much work to try to do a social distancing school, so we're just all going to stay home and learn from home.
Right.
You know, it honestly, it could, all of those options could happen, right? You know,
absolutely.
Depending on the district. You know, education in the United States is very decentralized. We don't have federal legislation necessarily that regulates our education sector. It's all based on the states. The states decide. So, you know, so it's going to look very different for different kids across the nation, not to mention, you know, the demographics, though, you know, just the variety of demographics and those markers, you know, that are going to impact kids who had more support during the pandemic are going to continue to exceed post-pandemic. Kids who didn't have that, and like due to the inequities in our system, are going to suffer the most during this pandemic. And then those feelings are going to be left the longest, you know, in those populations within those demographics based on race, class, geographical location, just whether you're in a city or a rural environment. There's going to be lots of variables as to what school is going to look like come fall.
Wow. Yeah. You're absolutely right. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be hectic. Do you believe that we should have state testing for the 2020-21 year? And if you do believe that we have state testing, do you believe that it should actually count as far as accountability is concerned?
My short answer is no. Ideally, I would love for this moment to be a moment where I would measured all together. I personally despise state testing. I understand the presence of testing has given us some insight on some deep inequities within the education sector, and so I do think that testing has its purpose, but I think that the culture of education has been emphasized on testing performance rather than actually preparing our students for the world outside of the classroom. The world is changing rapidly, and pandemics will continue, you know, because the way society is going, the encroachment on wildlife, you know what I mean? Like, all of this stuff is kind of intertwined. And so all of these other emergencies that we're going to have associated with climate change, associated with increasingly unequal systems based on our students, like, standardized testing becomes more and more obsolete. So I would love for this moment for us to be like, oh, standardized testing doesn't really work for us anymore. Let's come up with another way to evaluate our students and evaluate their success rather than academic proficiency.
Right. Yeah, well said. Well said.
Realistically, though, you know, that's not going to happen. I think that, you know, not an overhaul, you know, immediately. I think that, you know, attitudes will change, and that, you know, I think that there could be some slow shift away from testing, but, you know, I do think that there are going to be policy holders in place that say that we need to have it, and they're going to keep it. So just for the following school year, though, I do think that, you know, their scores are going to drop.
Definitely.
Scores are going to drop.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah, scores are going to drop across the board. For some demographics, it's not going to be as much because of support and situations at home during the pandemic. And then for others, it's going to be, you know, stark.
Yeah.
For others, it's going to be stark. I definitely think, you know, we're all experiencing this collective trauma, and so it's definitely going to show itself in academic performance because, you know, I think society right now is, you know, it's really hard to focus on, you know, reading proficiency and math proficiency, you know, at the moment and as a child. So, you know, carrying that on, you know, having to carry, you know, the effects of this trauma that are happening, and then to still have to be expected to perform academically is a lot to ask of our children. And so, no, I don't think that state testing should count for the following school year after this upcoming one. Yeah, I don't think we should do it.
I 100% agree. And you made an interesting point about, you know, kids being able to focus with everything going on, you know, with so much inequity. We already have an achievement gap. Also, we have a socioeconomic gap. And what about those parents who worked in retail and they were laid off? And yeah, maybe they got an unemployment check, but the unemployment check doesn't compare to what they used to earn. And so now they're struggling with bills and they're frustrated. We've seen in the news, child abuse has increased significantly. Domestic abuse has increased significantly. As a result of everything that's occurring, when we think about black and brown families and that structure, the amount of divorce is going to increase. Breakups are going to increase. And
thank you for listening to the Black Scholars Podcast. For more information, go to blackscholarspublishing.com.